when you have a tax issue, IRS issue, there are only three people in the country that are allowed to actually legally represent you. It's a CPA, an attorney, or an enrolled agent. Those are the only three licensed individuals that are allowed to speak on your behalf for in front of the IRS. But as the medical industry knows, and I like talking about the medical industry because I spent 11 years of my life in the medical industry, right? Mm-hmm. Is that we all know, even within our industry, right? They're specialists, in the medical industry, you go to a cardiologist when you got a heart problem or, they're specific when you got a specific problem. So even though CPAs, attorneys, or EAs are legally able to represent you, kind of like any general doctor can give you medical advice, you want to go to somebody that actually specializes in this type of work.
Welcome to the Real Estate Mogul MD podcast. Thanks for tuning in and taking control of your financial future. This is a show where we not only motivate and inspire, we give you actionable real-world experience to help you live life by design. You'll hear journeys and stories from other physicians, investors, coaches, consultants, and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, Brett Riggins. Today, I'm joined by Carlos Samaniego. He's an IRS enrolled agent and a tax resolution expert who helps people navigate the emotional and financial stress of tax debt. From his personal journey of overcoming a six-figure tax bill to helping others break free from IRS troubles, Carlos shares powerful lessons on financial resilience and taking control of your money. Here we go. Carlos, welcome to the show, man. How does it feel to be Carlos Samaniego today?
Today's good, man. Just got back from a holiday weekend or a volleyball, what I call our volleyball weekends. 3.5 days watching my daughter play volleyball for about 12 hours a day. So actually being at work today, it feels like it's a great day, man.
That's nice. Yeah. Volleyball, are we high school, college?
Daughter is a senior in high school, been playing club volleyball for years, and is getting recruited to play at the Coast Guard and Merchant Marine Academies for college. So,
oh, nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. So you've watched a few games then, huh? A few matches?
We watched, for those that have done that, 8 to 10 hours a day of watching, going through matches. Because typically it's a game, you're reffing, you're waiting an hour, a game, you're reffing. So it's an all-day affair. So those sports parents definitely understand that.
Yeah, it's cool. You get the ability to do that. So you have obviously a full-time career and you have the ability to pull away and do that. So let's jump into a little bit about you and your career. Yeah. And now kind of what gives you the ability to have those weekend holidays, right? And spend time with your family. You've helped countless professionals navigate IRS challenges. How'd you get started in tax resolution and what drives your passion for helping people with their finances?
Well, what's interesting, Brett, I didn't get involved in this business because I didn't grow up wanting to basically fight the IRS for a living, Mm-hmm. I actually started in the medical industry. I was actually, at a ripe age of 17 years old, I joined the Army as a medic, spent a few years in the Army, came out and became a EMT and then eventually a paramedic. And my journey starts there, literally. It was like my first year working as a EMT, and I remember I was working a whole bunch of overtime. For those physicians out there to understand how those EMS workers, working 24-hour shifts constantly, right? Wow. And I was doing a whole bunch of 24-hour shifts, and I remember the older guy telling me, "Hey, dude, why are you working so much?" It was like during the holiday season, and I'm like trying to make some extra money for the holidays. And that was my first introduction to the worst financial advice from a person that shouldn't be giving financial advice. And he had told me, "Hey, just claim 10 exemptions on that paycheck stub, and they're not going to take out the taxes, and you're going to have a lot more extra money." And Brett, I actually did that. I did the 10 exemption thing, did that for a few months, and then, tax preparation season comes rolling around the corner there. Went to go get my taxes prepared and realized I had I owed a lot of money. And the problem was I didn't learn my lesson and I never changed those exemptions. When I owed that lot of money, I actually did the worst thing you could do. I didn't file the tax return. I figured I can't afford that tax bill, so I'm just not going to file the tax return. Well, following year, same thing rolls around, make um, claiming 10 exemptions, living the lifestyle because, I'm a 21-year-old kid now at this time, making some really good money, doing a lot of overtime, never changed the taxes. And then year two rolls around, same problem, owed a lot of money. So I didn't file the tax returns. Brett, that went on for 8 years.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so I went 8 years not filing my income tax returns and ended up having almost a six-figure tax bill between the IRS and the state of California. And what's interesting with that is that it wasn't the IRS that actually finally caught up to me. It was the state of California that caught up to me. And if anybody's ever owed taxes in the world, especially here in California or any state that has a state income tax, you start to realize the state income tax tends to be a heck of a lot more aggressive than even the IRS. And it wasn't until literally because I was into my early 30s by this time, right? Gone 8 years not filing taxes, and it wasn't until I actually met my wife. By this time, I was no longer in the EMS work anymore, and I was working as a real estate mortgage lender, and ended up meeting a young lady that was trying to buy a house. We ended up, my interest went further beyond the house, and I ended up asking her out on a date. A miracle popped up, and she said yes. We ended up dating for a few months, and I ended up getting engaged to this young lady. But here's what makes it worse, Brett. I pulled a scumbag move, which I talk about in my book, is I actually ended up getting married to this young lady and never told her about my non-filing and my almost six-figure tax bill.
Oh, wow.
When I had married her, I had realized what I did. She married into my tax problems.
Wow.
And I realized at that point in time, I needed to do something about this or else I was going to
Have you worked off that debt yet?
No, nothing. I hadn't filed. Yeah, I hadn't filed. I had this huge tax debt. So I figured, you know what?
No, I mean the debt you have with your wife, like that's an emotional debt. Like that had to be so difficult. You're probably still paying on that debt.
Well, you're going to find what makes this all interesting is that I actually literally a couple of weeks after we got married, I started doing research and ended up finding somebody that could actually help me with my tax problems. I didn't know there were specialists that dealt with this type of thing. So when I talked to him, his name was Ernie. He sat down with me. He said, "Carlos, you're a good person. You made a stupid decision, but we can fix this." And that's what he did. And I actually finally went to my wife and said I had something that I had to talk to her about. And fortunately for me, she didn't divorce me, and I was able to get those tax problems fixed. And it wasn't until after we got that fix, I was looking at a career change in my late 40s. And I always remember a word that Ernie, the guy who helped me with my tax problem, he had told me, "Hey, if you're ever looking for a career change in your life, I think you'd be really good at this type of work." So in my early 40s, I ended up going back to school. I became a licensed enrolled agent by the Department of Treasury, where there's a specific license to legally represent taxpayers. I ended up getting that license, and then me and my wife, Liz, who sits right over here on the left-hand side, are the co-founders of Tax Debt Consultants. And that's how now that's what we do. We help people that got tax problems.
Wow. Well, is she over there right now while we're recording?
She just actually stepped out.
Okay, so when she listens to this, thank you, Liz, for your forgiving heart and being able to put up with Carlos. That's so amazing.
Oh, absolutely.
So amazing.
When she just stepped out, she said, "Hey, you're going to be on this call for probably the next hour. I'm going to run some errands." And I'm like, "Go for it." But I'll make sure she definitely listens to this.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So there's so much into that piece. I kind of want to rotate this and look at real estate as well, too, and talk a little bit about the real estate you invest in. I thought that was interesting as well. Yeah. But just to get out of that enrolled agent is a specification. So Correct. If you see that EA after somebody's name, then it's likely that they have the ability then to help negotiate your bad decisions and help you get past them.
Absolutely.
So for those out there listening who may have, and maybe even it's unintentional too, maybe you just didn't have the knowledge or that you needed to file a certain way or do a certain thing. reaching out for that specific reasoning, that negotiating power, that experience to not get forgive, but what do you call it when you resolve that with the
Well,
IRS?
you know what's neat, Brett, is that and this is really important for your listeners to understand, is that when you have a tax issue, IRS issue, there are only three people in the country that are allowed to actually legally represent you. It's a CPA, an attorney, or an enrolled agent. Those are the only three licensed individuals that are allowed to speak on your behalf in front of the IRS. But as the medical industry knows, and I like talking about the medical industry because I spent 11 years of my life in the medical industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that we all know, even within our industry, right? They're specialists. In the medical industry, you go to a cardiologist when you got a heart problem, or, they're specific when you got a specific problem. So even though CPAs, attorneys, or EAs are legally able to represent you, kind of like any general doctor can give you medical advice, you want to go to somebody that actually specializes in this type of work, because less than 3% of all EAs, attorneys, and CPAs actually represent people in front of the IRS. I get so many referrals from attorneys that just don't do this type of work. People will go to them thinking, I need help, but they're like, we don't deal with the IRS. You need to find somebody that specializes in that.
Yeah.
So yes, they're allowed to represent you, but you want to make sure that they understand what's involved there. And to answer that question, what happens is that when somebody actually has unfiled returns like I had, or a tax debt that it's way bigger than they had ever expected, whether they did something dumb like I did, basically not file my taxes or not and not pay the bills, or maybe it happened accidental. I just had a physician not too long ago that sold a very large real estate investment that ended up coming with a massive tax bill there, and he had no idea how he was going to handle that. So now it's our job to figure out, okay, what options are available based on the tax debt that you owe and based on your current financial position, your current income, and your current assets. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. The government just wants to know, what's your ability to pay based on your financial situation. And it really depends. Every case is so dramatically different.
So do you have clients that you work with that really aren't necessarily in trouble, but looking for a way to negotiate what's due on a particular sale like that? If it's a sale that would basically overcome their liquid assets,
right?
The liability would overcome their liquid assets or what they can pay. Is that a situation that you would work with somebody and say, "Hey, let's look at it"?
That's exactly what we do.
Interesting.
It's just that the bill is X. And your liquid assets or your income, you have no way of possibly ever paying back that bill within a certain time frame, especially by the time you add penalties and interest. Then we're looking at, okay, what options are available? It may be a situation like where I had a client that had a multi-million-dollar tax bill, and we were able to settle it for a small percentage. Or it could be that the IRS wants a specific payment plan based on the amount, but there's no possible way that you could even afford that based on your current situation. So, and that's what we do. We go back and forth trying to figure that information out.
Interesting. Very interesting. So tell us a little bit about your ventures into real estate. You know
what? My big venture, initially, when me and my wife got married, we actually looked into single family homes. A lot of us do for real estate investments, and had a couple of nightmare scenarios in that situation. So I wasn't, and I say there's certain people that just enjoy that. They like those challenges, and I wasn't one of those. It's just you get those calls in the middle of the night. But it was a friend of mine introduced me to an investment called mobile home investing. His name's Rob. He lived out in Ohio, and he was buying mobile homes literally for $10,000-$15,000. And he started teaching me how you can buy these mobile homes. And I love the concept because we would purchase these mobile homes and we would turn around, basically carry the paper on the sale. And the cash flow was so unreal that's kind of where that's where I love that game, because since they owned the property, we're just kind of carrying the paper. All we were is the bank, collecting the checks. So that's kind of where my interest is. It's just I like that process. Now we can't pick up a lot of these homes anymore for $10,000 or $15,000. They've kind of gone up over the years, but that's where I kind of like it. And I can't even do it here in California. These purchases were all out in the Midwest, but a mobile home here in California is $500,000 nowadays. Depending.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah, that's crazy. So I had a guest on a while back that was specializes in kind of not necessarily high end, but just that mobile home direction, so that people can afford to be a homeowner. Air quotes for the listeners out there, because it's not real property. It's a personal property, because basically it has wheels. Correct. Yeah, like a car. It has a title like a car. Exactly.
You're not really getting that appreciation. And a lot of investors are looking for that appreciation, right? This was more of a cash flow vehicle of we're purchasing for cash flow, not necessarily for the appreciation.
Yeah, and you were purchasing these things, and what created the cash flow was you were doing a seller finance on the sale. Exactly. And so that's what created that ability. So probably got some cash up front, and then basically we're servicing a note.
Exactly. And we started to realize after a while, a lot of these people, they wouldn't actually finish their,
So you get it back.
Their life changes. They were moving somewhere else, and they're like, you know what? We don't want this. So we just get the property back and just turn around and resell it. I mean, it's a nice situation.
And on those turns, Carlos, did you have to do any like what we would call a rent ready turn in single family? Mm-hmm. Did you have to go in and paint or clean up or anything like that?
Typically we go in and do that, but usually the cost wasn't all that bad at all.
Yeah. Interesting. So you've got a few of those. That's your passive side, basically almost like note investing at that point, but a seller finance, selling these things out. For physicians who want to invest in real estate, whether it's this seller finance direction, single family, multifamily, what are the most important tax strategies they should know?
You know what I'm telling people right now, you got to remember, I deal in that whole niche in regards of tax problems. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I'm telling investors, and I was on a couple of podcasts recently, real estate related podcasts, and this is the big thing I'm telling people to watch out for right now. Understand, when you're purchasing a property, you need to know everything that's going on in regards to the property, correct? If you're buying a property, are there any liens attached to that? Any potential liens that's going to happen? What do you know about or your investor partners? Oh, here's another big one. If you got partners and you're going into invest into a property, here's my thing right now for real estate people to understand. The IRS for the last 4.5 years, basically at the beginning of COVID, the IRS stopped all collection procedures on everybody throughout the country. It was part of, hey, the country's going through a pandemic right now. We are going to not aggressively or even attempt to collect on any past tax debt. We're not going to do any bank levies, any tax liens, anything until this is over. So literally for the last 4 years, almost 4.5 years now, no tax liens have been filed, even though people hadn't filed their tax returns, had $6-figure million tax debt. There were no tax liens actually filed. So what I've seen, and this is becoming an issue right now, people started getting into investments or buying properties, or may have had a partner in buying a property. And then all of a sudden, the IRS restarted all their collection efforts and restarted doing tax liens as of the last couple of months. So all of a sudden, here you are buying a property or have a partner on a property, and then all of a sudden a tax lien pops up, and now you can't do nothing on that property because you might have a $50,000, $100,000 tax lien on that property. Wow. Yet you didn't know that even existed, or it never popped up in your background check on the investor you were going to working on. So now all of a sudden you're going to start seeing huge tax liens being filed all over the country on properties. And what happens if you got into a property that didn't know this tax lien existed, or even there was a possibility of this actually existing, or you partnered up with somebody that didn't pay their tax bills, and all of a sudden, all their anything that has their social security number on it has tax liens being placed on it. So for me, that's a big thing right now, is just watch out, do your due diligence. We actually are now providing investors, if you're going to partner up with somebody, you can actually tell the investor you'd like to get a transcript to make sure that there is no past tax liabilities, where there can be a tax lien filed on anything that they do in the future.
Interesting. That's a service that you offer?
It's a brand new service that we started offering. Yeah.
Wow.
And what kind of brought this up, I had a real estate broker come to me. She wanted to partner up with another investor. And I started bringing this. She started talking, and I said, well, have you seen all his tax return filings? Yeah, I have. Does he owe any money? Because that's my mind. Does he owe any money? Because if he owes money, and the IRS always has the right to place a tax lien on any property that he owns. She goes, well, he didn't tell me. Well, you may want to get a clearance on that, and we can actually provide that clearance.
And that idea of somebody going into partnership, I think, is a great perspective. Look at this. The idea that, we really need to know, does he own any money? Are there any like IRS red flags that real estate investors or high income earners should watch out for?
IRS red flags in terms of the investor?
Yeah. So if I'm partnering up with somebody, Are there any red flags that should pop up?
Here's the red flags I would be looking for. One, typically to get into most real estate investments, all the lenders are typically asking maybe two years of tax returns, right? I would be looking at, hey, I want to make sure all your tax returns are filed, because Brett, we get calls on a regular basis. People have 3, 4, 5, 19 years of unfiled tax returns.
Whoa.
That happens regularly. And
there's no time limit of when they could come back after you.
There ain't no time limit. They can technically come back after you at any time.
Wow.
And what the government typically does, if you haven't filed returns, they'll actually file a return on your behalf. It's called a substitute for return. So they'll just create a liability and then come after you for that. And for a lot of people to realize, like, if you have, this is a classic example. I actually had a chiropractor recently come to me. The IRS had assessed almost $500,000 in tax debt on him. And he's like, I don't know where they're coming up with this number. And as I'm starting to dig into his situation, I found out he had a chiropractic license, but he wasn't a working chiropractor. So what happens is that here in California, the state of California, because he has an occupational license as a chiropractor, they assumed he's working as a chiropractor. And he didn't file a return. So they just came up with the average income of a chiropractor in his zip code and then assessed the tax based on that. So that's how they ended up coming with this huge tax bill. So we had to go back to them, file the actual returns for the missing tax years to replace the fake assessments that they were actually creating for him. So
there was that particular instance, there was no filing at all, or what he was still filing personal.
There was no filing at all. And I later found out it was a situation where he was taking care of his parents. His parents were wealthy, so he didn't really have to work. But he had a chiropractic license and didn't want to lose it, so he did what he had to do to keep it. But the government just thought he was working as a chiropractor and not filing returns.
So at what point are you not required to file a tax return?
If you have an occupational license and you live in a state that has an income tax, I would file a tax return, period. Mm-hmm. Well, I live in California. California, if you have an occupational license or you have an address in California, they're going to be looking for a tax return. Now, the IRS is dramatically different in regards to this. The IRS basically says if you made more than $600 in self-employment income, $600, you're required to file a tax return. Now, if you're getting a W-2, a paycheck, it's going to be totally dependent on your tax filing status. Are you single? Are you married? Typically, the amount is $12,000 or more. If you're actually getting a paycheck, you have to file a tax return. So anything less than that, you don't have to file a tax return.
Interesting. Now, there's a lot that changes in regards to legislation taxes, all of that stuff when administrations change.
Right.
So we've recently had administration change. We're recording this here in the beginning of February in 2025.
Yeah.
With tax laws changing so frequently, what trends should investors or business owners be aware of right now for the next 4 years?
You know what? I can say this, and this is taking any political sides. For business owners and investors, we should see a lot of positive changes. Even if we're just keeping the tax credits and breaks that we've had for the last almost 8 years now. There's going to be a lot of positive investments. I mean, look at the President Trump is a real estate investor. So I would imagine there's going to be a lot of positive changes for that going forward. Now, here's the thing. You really want to work with a CPA, a person that understands these changes, because they're literally happening almost, it seems like, on a daily basis. Things are going to start changing. I don't do tax returns. That's not what I do. I deal with the old stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But
you deal with the problems.
All I can do is just tell your listeners, if you are a real estate investor, make sure you have, you're working with a tax professional that understands the new changes that are happening, because they're literally going to happen daily. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, I'm also telling people, because this is a challenge I'm seeing right now, Brett, that people that owe money to the IRS or have past due taxes, I'm actually getting people calling me saying that they're not going to worry about it right now about their old tax problems, because they believe, because of the new administration, that he's going to get rid of the IRS. Mm. Please, guys. You know what? The IRS has survived, 30 multiple wars, multiple mm-hmm. administrations. The IRS, changing government policies doesn't happen overnight. It can take years to do that. And if the new administration wants to get rid of the IRS, guess what? It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen the next day. It could take a couple of years, even if he's able to do it. The problem is, when you owe the government money, they can take your money out of your bank account within days. Mm-hmm. All that stuff happens pretty quickly. So please don't think that just because there's a new administration that doesn't like the IRS or is making statements about getting rid of it, that's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah. There's a lot. I always say there's a lot. The difference between micro and macro, and I just cannot fathom at that macro piece, the size, the scope, the bureaucracy of what is there. So it's interesting to see some of the transparency mm-hmm. that seems to be coming through now on different platforms, but the transparency of all these things that we have no idea is there. The one thing we do know of is that it requires legislation to make changes like this, which means Absolutely. It has to go through the House and the Senate, and then back to the table of the chief executive officer to put it into play. But with all that is great advice. Don't throw all your tokens into the wishing well. Take care of your stuff. Take care of your problems. And if the listeners have just this little seed of, hey, what if I didn't do this right? Or maybe I need to talk to Carlos. What's the best way that they can connect with you?
Best way, you can always go to my website. All my contact information is there as Tax Debt Consultant. But for any of your listeners, I do have this free book. It's called How to Make the IRS an Offer They Can't Refuse. You can pick it up at taxdebtbook.com, taxdebtbook.com. It has all my contact information, tells a little bit about my story, but, definitely grab the book. You may know somebody. I always say, Brett, I call it one of the biggest secrets that exists today is that people that got tax problems just don't know who to go to, because it's not your Thanksgiving table topic that pops up. Oh, I haven't filed my tax returns in a few years, or I owe hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxes. It took me close to 20 years to really deal with, from the beginning of my problem to when I dealt with it. Took me 20 years, and I didn't know people specialize in doing this. So. Yeah, that's just something for your listeners. It's a great resource, and at least hey, I think I know somebody that can help you with that situation. Yeah.
It's got to be, there's got to be a level of almost like personal shame too that you've got to overcome because you've done this. You've made these decisions to make this kind of mistake, and now you've got to own up. I mean, that's got to be the hardest thing is just talking to somebody. I mean, even Carlos, in your situation, the woman of your life, the person that's going to change your life, you didn't even have the ability to own up to it then, So that's
I didn't, and people have said, my daughter has asked me because, my daughter, she actually works for me. She's read my book, and she actually asked me, and it was a hard question. She's like, Dad, why didn't you tell Mom?
Mm-hmm.
And I was honest with her, and I said, you know what? Because I thought if I told her, she would leave me.
Mm-hmm.
This is before we got married. So I didn't want her to leave me. I just fell in love with the person. And of course, that's just wrong thinking. What I should have done. And we actually wrote a book together. It's actually over my left shoulder here.
Yeah.
Love and Taxes, right?
Yeah.
Where we talk about this is that topics like this need to come up before people get married. Hey, have you filed your taxes? I even talk about in the book, each of you getting a report. That report I talked about, every couple should get that report. Let's make sure you filed all your taxes, and we're not dealing with these old tax debts, right?
Right.
It's just like getting a credit report. That's a smart move. I had somebody recently I was talking to. He's like, "Yeah, I didn't have tax debt, but I married my wife with $500,000 of student loans, and she didn't know nothing about it."
Oh goodness.
And going back to, you said something earlier, the shame, the fear, the health problems that you have. For the longest time, I thought I had medical problems. I thought I had a heart problem in my 30s and 40s. And I later found out it wasn't that I had a heart problems. It was the stress of living with this on me was creating anxiety and just these palpitations, right? Yeah. And Brett, unfortunately, I have a close friend lives out in Texas. He had a client that was a physician that was dealing with a multi-million-dollar tax debt. He took his life, and it was just, these are types of problems that, as long as everybody understands that it doesn't matter how big your tax bill is, the IRS knows they can't get blood out of a rock. Mm-hmm. And they want to make sure that you can pay your living expenses, your basic living expenses. So any problem is actually solvable. It really is. And it's just a matter of for us to reach out to them and say, hey, here's our situation. What can we do? What kind of help can we get? They want to work with you if you're willing to work with them. Yeah.
And reaching out to the IRS to start that process, that conversation. But the first conversation, even before that, is if you know somebody, or if you yourself, I'm talking to the listeners out there, have this happening, reach out to Carlos, and it starts with a conversation. That's the first conversation, is with a colleague, with Carlos, to have this almost epiphany of, hey, there is a solution. It's not the end of the world. There can be ways out of this thing, and there are people out there who want to help. And I think this is a great way to take that next step with you, Carlos, to have those conversations, because your personal story, your personal experience, you've been there, you lived that cloud that hung over your head, and how that affected you personally, how it affects your relationship. But you've overcome. And it starts with a conversation with you, taxdebtconsultant.com, and the book, taxdebtbook.com. Reach out and hook up with Carlos. Right?
Yep, that's it, Brett. I appreciate that, man.
Awesome. So thank you for your time. A little light note on the way out here, Carlos. Yeah. My wife is showing me this clip of this comedian saying that we should have a National Silent Letter Day. And it made me think of that day when you look at debt, because debt is really Deb-T. So what's the B in there? What, Deb-T? This National Silent Letter Day, we would all say the words that have the letters that nobody talks about. So the letter B in debt is the letter that nobody talks about. We'll have a National Deb-T Day. How about that?
There you go.
We'll put these links in the description. Thank you again for your time. It's been an inspiring conversation. And again, thank you. And thank you to your wife for making this all happen and forgiving you and help then lifting you up. And now so many others can be forgiven along the way.
Thank you so much. And she's going to appreciate that. She's really the person that runs the show here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Have a great day, man. Wow, that was an eye-opening conversation with Carlos. And, the biggest thing for me, the emotional aspect of it. There are people out there to help. There are solutions. So if you know of somebody who is maybe struggling with that debt, tax issues, connect them with Carlos for sure. Here are 3 big key takeaways that I jotted down during our conversation. Avoiding the problem only makes it worse. Take action before the IRS takes it for you. Financial stress is real. It affects relationships, health, and mental well-being. There's always a way forward. No matter how big the tax bill, the solution exists. Multiple solutions exist. If you know someone struggling with a tax debt, don't wait. Reach out to Carlos at taxdebtconsultant.com. You can actually get his book as well that's taxdebtbook.com. I'll have these in the description for you as well. Thank you again.